Hey everybody, this is Dr. Flight. It is fantastic to be touching base with you. We're going to talk in this recording on product market space. And there's two fundamental things that we start out with, and that would be defining the space and then analyzing product market spaces. So we'll look at a way to use a chart or a picture or a figure to illustrate the space and how product markets are defined. And in particular, what we're concerned about here is thinking very, very clearly about the need that is being satisfied in the marketplace and defining that very clearly, and then structuring the industry or representing the structure of the industry to show how that need is being satisfied with different companies and firms and industry elements. So looking at the structure of the industry, defining the structure of the product market is one. The next step then is to take a closer look in terms of how the product market is set up in terms of who specifically is providing value to the marketplace. And so what we're going to do is introduce something called a product market grid, which is simply a tool that's used to chart how the market is being satisfied and by whom, by what firms. So there's two components then that we'll talk about moving forward. Again, kind of defining the boundaries of product markets, and then followed by a simple tool that's sometimes used to help analyze and better understand product markets. So please enjoy. Again, if you have any questions, reach out and I'll be happy to touch base with you. Thanks. All right, so what we're going to do is take a look at defining and describing a product market to begin with. As the name implies, a product market is a description or a construct of where a need is being met, represented by consumers, which would be the market, and that need is being met by solutions that are provided by an industry or a series of firms who produce a product to do so. So when we talk about product markets, we're talking about structures of both firms and industries and also markets or market segments that are defined and that sort of work together. Sometimes they're in a hierarchy and we can actually chart these. But it's the structure of an industry or structure of a set of markets where a particular need is being provided or served. They exist when buyers have certain needs and products are produced to meet those specific needs. As a reminder, from a definition standpoint, we think of markets as groups of consumers that have a similar need or want or demand, and likewise industries are groups of firms that have that are unique in that they share the same product category with each other, so they have the ability to satisfy the need that's being met. Here's a little picture and a depiction which is kind of interesting when you think about the beverage industry over periods of time. In the 1940s, you can see how the beverage industry was not particularly broad or deep in terms of assortment, and it was fairly narrowly defined with only 4 different categories, if you will: milk, coffee, tea, soft drinks, and then the advent of Kool-Aid when it came into the marketplace as an alternative juice or drink. And then in the 1960s, the popularity of these items grew, so the volume market demand grew. In the 1980s, there began an expanse of products to mineral water, added fruit drinks, sports drinks, and then in the 2000s, the volume of these of these product categories and groupings, the demand for them grew, and also added bottled water, mineral water, and so forth. Energy drinks emerged as well out of the sport drink category. So basically what we're looking at is something like over time that has changed and been modified. And also though the definition or the boundary of like non-alcoholic beverages or the beverage category has expanded quite a bit to reflect new market segments, but then also reflect products that are now satisfying those new market segments as well. So that's kind of an indication of how product markets and the structure of the product markets can change over time. And we'll look at another depiction here in a little bit. One of the key elements here is to think in terms of how we define the market and whether we define it very broadly or very narrowly in terms of our scope. So this is a theme that'll come back in other areas of marketing. When we start thinking about entry strategies, we think about the scope of the market and whether we think of ourselves as entering the market to serve a broad audience or a large non-differentiated market, non-segmented, or whether we look to serve a more narrowly defined market. So in this first grouping here, we think of a broad definition of drink categories. So we have soft drinks in a worldwide perspective, non-alcoholic drinks as well. Down below, though, we take a look at specifically energy drinks, as opposed to the broader term of carbonated beverages or drinks in general, and we look at a much different type of market size. So when we go from the 30 billion dollar kind of market demand size for the United States to maybe a smaller niche or a smaller grouping, we can see the effects of how we define the market from broad to narrow, and that's one of the elements of scope that we think about. So as we move forward, when we define and analyze what we call the product market, there are going to be a number of steps or stages involved, and what we're really looking at here are these first couple stages where we determine the boundaries of the structure of the product market, and that's what we're talking about here. And then we look at some analysis of the product markets that we have subsequently defined. Later, we look at analyzing end users and also analyzing competitors. And then finally, we look to do some forecasting and some projections within the product market category that we have defined earlier. Now, these last few elements are things that we do all through marketing, particularly when we start looking at market segments, segmentation process, targeting, things of that nature. We oftentimes think about analyzing our end user, analyzing competition, and then doing some forecasting to better understand future demand for a product. So this is not a process that's isolated to the early planning stages. This is an element of marketing that we do all through planning at the organizational level, but then also at the strategic and functional levels as well. So if we look at some of these concepts through the model of the product market, you'll probably also see them again when you look at things like segmentation and targeting techniques, and also positioning techniques later on in other course elements. First, though, we want to look at this idea of a product market structure or boundary. So generally speaking, what we want to do is create a definition of our product market from a very generic or general sense. So what we often do is look at a basic need that is being satisfied or that needs to be satisfied. And then what we'll do is subsequently identify categories and variations that may be used to satisfy that need down the road. So for instance, earlier we looked at the beverage industry, and specifically we looked at the non-beverage product market. So the non-beverage product, or non-alcoholic product market. So when we looked at that, think of that as a very, very broad and generic product category where you say non-alcoholic beverages. It can include many different types of beverages, obviously ones that are non-alcoholic. So that's a very generic statement or concept in terms of defining the product category. What we might then do is within the non-alcoholic product category, we might further define the categories as maybe water, fruit juices, flavored drinks, carbonated drinks, things like that. So we have 3 or 4 or 5 sort of subcategories that we've defined, again, fairly broadly, but they all fall under the category of the generic need of non-alcoholic beverages. So that would be the kind of the next stage that we do, where we identify product categories or types of product that would fall under the generic definition of, in this case, we're talking about non-alcoholic beverages. Then what we'll do is we can further define the market or the product market even more so when we think about, say, for instance, non-alcoholic beverages that fall under the carbonated beverage category. We could say, well, there are colas, there are fruity carbonated beverages, so like grape flavored or strawberry flavored or lemon lime flavored. There are root beers and other specialty flavors like that. You could further define it as maybe a diet carbonated beverage versus a non-diet like sugared carbonated beverage. We could think of them as having caffeine or not having caffeine, and so on and so forth. So within the carbonated beverage category, we can have lots of different variations and varieties of products that again continue to serve the non-alcoholic beverage need, but in a more and more specific way. So by doing this, by structuring a product market by needs and by product type, we're able to create a fairly elaborate description of what the bounds of the product market may actually entail. So in this case, we have beverages, and we could define this in a lot of different ways, but people have a need to drink beverages, to whatever those beverages might be. That's a need that the market has, that people have. People will pay for that. So that's the generic need within the product or the product class. Now, we also have lots of varieties or product types or categories which might be jump out here. We have alcoholic and we have non-alcoholic. Among the different choices that we have. Within non-alcoholic, we have different variations here: water, milk, sports energy, coffee, tea, juice, and so forth. Beyond that, we have even more variations and variants. Here we have colas, root beer, ginger, fruits, and so forth, which are illustrated in variant B. And then beyond that, we have even more distinction when we start thinking about differentiated brands. So this is a structure that is designed and through research, obviously, and through a understanding of both the marketplace and also the competitive landscape, we can create these charts or these graphs to best depict the structure of our product market. It also suggests the boundaries of the product market too. So, for instance, we wouldn't have maybe sports energy drinks, and milk kind of in the same area. It's interesting though, there could be some cases where we might consider coffee an energy drink, but we need to clearly define what each of these categories represent and make sure that we adhere to that structure as we move forward. So this is one tool that we want to use, and it's a very important first step to analyzing a product market. In fact, this is actually a big deal when it comes to planning for growth and being able to anticipate where substitute products might come into play, or where new products could come into play and create new market spaces. So in other words, imagine years ago we didn't have the sports energy category. This is a new category which created a new group of consumers, or identified a new need that consumers had. So that helped to expand and create a new market base for the non-alcoholic beverage area, but it also most likely took away market share and sales and demand from other product categories. So for instance, if you were a water company, and you didn't see or didn't anticipate the sports drink product category on the horizon, then you may have missed the boat, so to speak. Or certainly if you're a soft drink producer and you don't recognize the sports energy drink category, you're obviously missing a big part of the market that's taking sales away from you. So that's an illustration of how we sometimes think of this as a planning model, and one where we can chart out potential threats that we're going to see in the future if we're proactive in our analysis moving forward. All right, so we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about analyzing the product market next. So one of the goals here is to match products that are being produced by firms with markets that have similar needs. We're going to introduce something called the Product Market Grid, which is a managerial tool that'll help us better understand how to create growth, how to help serve the marketplace, and how to be strategic as we move forward. So we want to be able to identify products that are offered by the industry. And what we want to do is use those products and the grid that we'll create as a picture or an illustration to form strategy. And this is a big strategic tool that marketers can use as they move forward in planning products and also protecting themselves from competitors' influence and so forth. So the product market grid looks a little bit like this, where we simply list our market segments on one axis here, and we have different products that are offered through the industry or within a specific firm across the top up here. So products, markets. Those are the two pieces that we're looking at. Obviously, they represent the product market concept in a managerial tool. Now, the illustration I have is a little outdated, or it's a little dated, but it serves the purpose. This is Reebok's product market grid. So this is a product market grid for a specific firm. However, it could be an industry grid as well. If we added products that were offered to the marketplace outside of Reebok, we would also, we would list them up top here under the products. And then what we've done is we've looked at market segments that are served and that can be defined probably through a segmentation process, and then listed along the side here. And in this case, we have performance market segments and non-athletic market segments, and we have the relative size of each of those listed here as well, which is very helpful. Within these generic market segments, we have some specific market segments being runners, aerobic fitness, tennis, and so forth. Down we have children, walkers, comfort, style conscious consumers, and so forth there as well. Now, what's important here is that we recognize that the variety of products that are offered within the industry specifically are geared towards or target specific market segments. So the running shoe is obviously positioned towards runners in that market segment, and we would subsequently identify the demand among runners and the market size and how much they tend to spend on the product and so on and so forth. Additionally, we have products in the marketplace called cross-training shoes that runners might also buy. And so you can see here a cross-reference of products that are appropriate for each market segment, which represents specific needs that are in the marketplace. Also, we have cross-market uses for products as well, where the running shoe is primarily designed for runners. Walkers may also use it, and then people who just simply like to wear those types of shoes because they look good, they may buy those shoes as well. As secondary market opportunities exist. So in other words, this chart can be very managerial and strategic. You can use it in a lot of different ways to chart growth and identify opportunities that present themselves in the marketplace, and go from there. So using this from a managerial perspective, there's 4 different growth strategies that you've probably learned about in the past in marketing, but that are appropriate to identify using this particular tool. One of these would be a market segment or a market development growth strategy, where we identify new markets that we do not yet have products or that we do not yet try to reach with the current products that we have. So if we, in other words, positioned some of our products to new markets, we would be creating growth by bringing an existing product to a market that would be new to us. And there are any number of elements here that make sense in terms of how we do this and why we do a market development growth strategy. You can pause the video and you can look at these yourself, but be sure to identify, kind of the pros, I guess, and why you would want to do a market development strategy and if it makes sense to you. 3 other strategies exist as well. Similar to the market growth strategy, we have a product growth strategy where we look to create new products that would satisfy existing markets that we already have. So in other words, if we know that there's a product, a market with specific need, maybe we could add products that they would serve this market and they would like those types of things. So product growth strategies, product development strategy, that's what we're talking about here. And again, it expands this chart that we saw earlier. So the product market grid actually grows and expands by column in this particular case, whereas it expanded by row in the market development case. Again, you may choose to pause the video if you want to think about how and why and when you do a product growth strategy. There are opportunities to do that as well. The diversification strategy is one where we combine a growth strategy through products and a growth strategy through markets to expand the product market grid in a diagonal fashion by looking for new opportunities to sell product in areas that would be brand new to the firm, both in product and in markets. So again, we're using this product market grid as a managerial tool to form strategy as we move forward. This strategy, by the way, is by far the most risky strategy in terms of growth when we look to manage how we're going to position our product among our competitors and the product market itself. So just be aware that this is easily the most risky way to do business. There are 2 risks involved where we deal with product failure risk and then also market failure risk as well. Finally, the market penetration strategy is the last strategy that we look at typically when we look at marketing growth strategies. And this is one where we really don't change the shape of the product market chart at all. It is essentially the same. We don't add new products and we don't add new markets to our focus. But instead what we do is we look to grow market demand and perhaps share by simply building awareness, creating better lines of distribution, and essentially selling more product to existing customers that we have or the existing market that we serve with the products that we currently have. So again, there are a number of ways that we can engage in a market penetration strategy. Pause the video if you want to take a look at these in a little bit more detail. But they're ones, again, strategies that we've seen probably in the past. So as a review, we want to be very clear about defining the boundaries and the structure of a product market. Then we want to begin to analyze the product market. And one of the really, really great tools to be able to do that is the product market grid. And one of the reasons why I advocate it is because you can form a lot of strategy as a result of what you see in the product market grid. What you can also do is you can create a product market grid multiple times over time. So it's not a static document. You create it once, and then after a month you create it again, and then after another month you keep doing it. And what it helps you do is identify your competitor's strategy as well as your own. So if you mark the grid over time, you'll be able to see trends that are happening, and those trends will identify what your strategy should be, while simultaneously identifying what your competitor's strategy is as you move forward. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions. This is part of our discussion on product markets in general. So if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.